Okay, get this. Researchers are now using fractals, those crazy patterns you find all over in nature, to build a whole new type of AI.
Really, it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, we're talking AI that can create super complex data, like high-resolution pictures, or even, get this, models of the human brain.
That's right. We're diving deep into the research on what they're calling fractal generative models today, and it's going to be a wild ride. So if you're enjoying these deep dives, be sure to hit that subscribe button. It really helps us out. Thanks for the reminder.
What's so cool about these models is that they're built to mimic how nature builds complexity bit by bit, layer by layer.
Like how?
It's like when you look at a snowflake, every tiny branch is like a mini version of the whole snowflake itself.
Okay, yeah, I kind of remember fractals from way back in math class.
Right.
But how do they actually use those for AI? It sounds like, I don't know, something out of Star Trek or something. Haha. Yeah, it might sound like science fiction, but the idea behind it is pretty simple. Think of it like building with Legos, but instead of one giant instruction booklet, you have smaller booklets for each part. And those have even smaller ones inside, like those Russian nesting dolls.
Oh, okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah, and these fractal models are kind of like that. They use something called recursive invocation, which basically means the model uses smaller versions of itself to handle different parts of the data.
So it's like, instead of tackling this giant problem all at once, it breaks it down into smaller, easier pieces, like with those nesting dolls.
Exactly. And that approach is especially important when you're dealing with something as complex as making images pixel by pixel. It really takes a lot of computing power.
So let's get into that.
Yeah.
What were some of the biggest challenges these researchers had when they were trying to, generate images at such a detailed level? Because that just sounds massive.
Yeah, it's a huge undertaking. Imagine having to predict not just one pixel, but the entire arrangement of millions of pixels to form a recognizable image. You have to figure out all those crazy relationships between pixels and capture the whole structure of the image.
Okay, now I'm seeing how this whole fractal approach could be a real game changer. But how do they actually design the model?
Well, at the heart of it, they use what are called autoregressive models. These are kind of like expert pattern predictors. They've learned to predict the next pixel based on the ones that came before it.
So it's like that predictive text thing on our phones, but for images.
You got it. And by connecting those predictions across different levels of the fractal, they can make crazy realistic pictures. Imagine it like having a whole bunch of artists, each one focusing on a different level of detail, from the big picture stuff down to the tiny little brushstrokes.
That's wild. And I was reading that these autoregressive models often use transformers, which, those are those super powerful neural networks that are everywhere these days. Do those come into play here too?
Oh, absolutely. Transformers are essential for making sense of the image data inside those autoregressive models. They help the model understand how all the pixels relate to each other and catch those long-range patterns within the picture.
Gotcha. So they've got this cool new architecture using fractals, autoregressive models, and transformers. But did it work? What kind of results did they get?
Well, the results are pretty impressive. They were not only able to make high-quality images, but they did it really efficiently.
Oh, so?
They found that this whole fractal thing was incredibly efficient. It took only twice the computational power to generate a 256 by 256 image compared to a 64 by 64 image, and that's unheard of with traditional AI models.
Wow, that's a huge leap forward. It's like they've cracked the code to make those high-resolution images without needing a supercomputer.
Exactly. And this efficiency opens up all sorts of possibilities. Imagine the kind of detailed images we could generate in the future. It's really exciting.
You mentioned earlier that this approach could be used for more than just making pictures. Can you tell me more about that?
Of course. This is where it gets really interesting. Remember how we talked about fractals being found everywhere, in coastlines, tree branches, even our brains? Well, researchers believe this fractal approach could be used to understand and model all sorts of other complex systems.
So we're talking about more than just making pretty pictures.
Right, yeah. We're talking about potentially unlocking new secrets about nature and even ourselves. It's pretty mind-blowing stuff.
Okay, I'm hooked. Before we get into all that, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back to continue exploring the incredible world of fractal generative models.
Welcome back to our deep dive into fractal generative models. Before the break, we were talking about how this research could be used for way more than just making images.
Right, and I'm really curious about those potential uses in medicine. It sounds like this fractal approach could really change things, especially when it comes to understanding how proteins fold.
You're absolutely spot on. Protein folding is one of the biggest mysteries in biology, and these fractal models offer a whole new way of looking at it. But to understand why, let's back up a bit and talk about what proteins actually are and why their folding is so important.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me the protein folding 101.
Sure. So proteins are like these tiny machines that make life possible. They do all sorts of essential jobs inside our cells, from moving molecules around to speeding up chemical reactions. And the way they're able to do all that depends on their unique three-dimensional shapes.
So it's not just what they're made of, it's how they're put together, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like origami, where you can fold a piece of paper into a bird or a flower, depending on how you fold it.
That's a perfect analogy. The sequence of amino acids, which are like the building blocks of proteins, determines how the protein folds into its final 3D shape. And this intricate folding process is what gives each protein its special function.
Okay, I'm starting to get how complex this is.
Yeah.
But how does this connect to the whole fractal idea?
Well, the key is in the way proteins are structured. They have
Oh.
a really cool nested structure, kind of like those Russian dolls we talked about earlier. You have amino acids, which link up to form chains, and those chains fold into even more complex 3D shapes. It's layers of complexity, just like those fractals we see everywhere in nature.
So are you saying the fractal model could learn from those smaller units, the amino acids, and use that to predict how the whole protein will fold?
You got it. It's like having this microscopic architect who understands the basic building blocks and can use that knowledge to design and build a whole building.
That's amazing. But what does it actually mean if we can predict protein folding? Like, what's the real-world impact?
The possibilities are huge. Imagine being able to design drugs that precisely target specific proteins involved in diseases like Alzheimer's, cancer, or even viruses. If we know how a protein folds, we can design molecules that fit perfectly into its nooks and crannies, either blocking the bad stuff it does or making the good stuff it does even better.
So it's like finding the exact key for a specific lock.
Exactly. That level of precision could revolutionize how we discover and develop drugs, leading to treatments that are way more effective and have fewer side effects.
That's really incredible. And you mentioned before that fractals have been seen in the structure of our brains. Could this approach also be used to understand, like, the most complex organ we have?
It's definitely a possibility that has scientists excited. Our brains are these incredibly complex networks of neurons, and those networks have a hierarchical structure that looks a lot like fractals. Some researchers think that these fractal models could be used to simulate how our brains work, which could lead to breakthroughs in understanding how we think, learn, and maybe even what consciousness is.
Okay, now that's getting into some seriously mind-blowing stuff. But modeling the human brain, even with fractals, sounds like a huge task. What are some of the roadblocks the researchers might run into?
Oh, it's definitely a massive challenge. One of the biggest hurdles is just the sheer size and complexity of the brain. We're talking billions of neurons connected in all these intricate ways. Capturing that level of detail in a computer model is incredibly tough.
So even with those efficiency gains from the fractal approach, we're still hitting the limits of what computers can do.
That's right. We'd need much more powerful computers, better algorithms, and a deeper understanding of how the brain works at a fundamental level.
It sounds like we're still at the beginning of this exploration, but the potential is huge.
Absolutely. And even if we can't perfectly model the brain anytime soon, trying to build such a model will lead to amazing insights and discoveries along the way. It's all about pushing the boundaries of what we know and exploring those uncharted areas of human consciousness.
This conversation has really opened my eyes to all the possibilities with these fractal generative models. It's not just about making cool pictures, it's about potentially revolutionizing fields like medicine and even figuring out how our own brains work.
It's really a testament to the power of thinking across disciplines, of finding inspiration in the natural world, and of that constant pursuit of knowledge that drives science forward.
And speaking of knowledge, this deep dive has given us a lot to think about. Before we move on to the last part of our deep dive, where we'll connect this research to our listeners and talk about what it means for a world that's becoming more and more driven by AI, I think it's important to touch on the ethical side of things.
You're absolutely right. With any technology this powerful, especially one that deals with something as complex as the human brain, we have to have serious discussions about the ethical implications.
Exactly. If we're talking about AI that can potentially model and maybe even simulate brain activity, we need to be very careful about the risks and make sure these technologies are developed and used responsibly.
No question about it. We need to consider things like privacy, autonomy, and even what it means to be human in a world where AI can copy our cognitive abilities so well.
This isn't just a conversation for scientists and engineers. It's something that needs to involve ethicists, policymakers, and all of us.
Absolutely. These conversations need to happen now before these technologies get so advanced that we lose control of how they impact our lives and our future. It's about making sure AI is a force for good, something that helps us reach our full potential instead of holding us back.
I couldn't agree more. This has been such a thought-provoking discussion. Before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, where we'll connect this research back to you, our listener, and talk about its impact on an increasingly AI-driven world, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back to continue this fascinating exploration. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been on this incredible journey exploring this whole world of fractal generative models. We've gotten into the nitty-gritty of how they work, seen how they can make those amazing visuals, and even thought about how they could change fields like medicine and help us understand our own brains.
It's been a wild ride, that's for sure. And now it's time to bring it all back home. Connect this research to you, our listeners, and see why it matters in a world where AI is becoming more and more important.
Exactly. We talked a lot of cool stuff, but what does it all mean for, the average person? Why should someone who's not a scientist or a programmer care about AI that copies nature's patterns?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I think one of the most important things about this research is that it can make AI less mysterious, less scary, and easier for everyone to understand.
I like that. It's like we're taking this technology that can seem so complicated, almost magical, and showing that it's actually based on the same principles we see all around us in nature.
You got it. We're showing that connection between AI and those patterns we see everywhere, like how trees branch out or how snowflakes form. That makes AI feel less like something totally alien and more like a tool that uses ideas from the world we already know.
It's like saying, hey, AI isn't this super complicated, unknowable thing. It's just another way of using those cool patterns and complexity that we see in the universe.
That's a great way to put it. And when people start to see it that way, I think it helps them feel more comfortable with AI, more able to learn about it and use it in a smarter way.
I agree. We live in a world where AI is everywhere. How we shop, what news we see, our healthcare, even the legal system. It's really important for all of us, not just the experts, to understand how this technology works because it can affect our lives in so many ways.
I couldn't agree more. And what I find so exciting about this fractal approach is that it could lead to AI systems that are more transparent, more accountable for what they do.
Oh, tell me more about that. That sounds interesting.
Well, think about those typical AI models. They're like those black boxes we hear about. We put data in, get an answer out, but we don't really know how the AI got to that answer.
Right. It's like the AI is speaking some secret language. And that can be kind of unsettling, especially when the AI is making decisions that affect us in real life.
Exactly. But this fractal approach, you know how it breaks those big, complicated problems into smaller, more manageable pieces? It's like it gives us a way to build AI that's easier to understand.
So instead of just blindly trusting whatever the AI tells us, we could actually see how it got to that answer, right?
Exactly. It's like having this instruction manual for the AI so we can look inside that black box and see what's going on. That makes people trust AI more, especially as it becomes more powerful and is used to make bigger decisions that affect our lives.
It's like we're moving away from that just trust the algorithm idea
Yep.
and towards a relationship with AI that's more open and understandable.
You got it. And that move towards transparency is super important if we want AI to be used ethically and responsibly, in a way that lines up with our values.
I totally agree. It's not enough to just build powerful AI. We need to build AI that we can understand, that we can trust, and that we can ultimately control.
Couldn't have put it better myself.
I think we've really explored a lot in this deep dive. We started with these mind-blowing fractal generative models, learned how they work, saw how they could change fields like medicine, and even help us understand our own brains. And we even touched on some of the big philosophical questions about consciousness and what it means to be human in a world with AI.
It's been an amazing journey, and I really hope our listeners are walking away with a lot to think about.
Me too. And if you're feeling inspired, if you want to learn more, we encourage you to dig deeper. We've got the research paper we've been talking about linked in the show notes, and there's tons of information online about fractals, AI, and how these fields are coming together. It's a rabbit hole worth exploring.
And the coolest part is that the future of AI isn't set in stone. It's something we're all creating together. By learning about these technologies, asking those tough questions, and being part of the conversation, we can all help shape the world we want to live in.
That's a great point to end on. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of fractal generative models. We've had a blast exploring this with you.
And we'll be back soon with another episode, taking a look at some more cutting-edge research and big ideas that are shaping our world.